Hi everyone, welcome back to Research Roundup, where I go through the most interesting research in health that I've run into the past week and explain what they mean so that you don't have to. And this week I only have two studies to talk about, but both are very, very interesting, and I did want to give time to go into a little bit more detail so that you understand exactly what they found out. So first I'll be talking about some new research that came out this month about microplastics. Unfortunately, it isn't good news for us. But second, I'll be talking about ADHD in young people and how that can influence their use of vapes and also cigarettes. So a little bit to cover today. Let's go. So we're starting off strong with what I think is the most interesting piece of research that has come out in a little while. I've been keeping an eye on microplastics for a little while, but always from a little bit of a distance, and that's because I don't really feel I know enough about this issue to make a full-on video about it. But then this study came out early this month, so that's early February, and this was a study that looked into whether microplastics and nanoplastics can accumulate in our brains and also in some other organs, and it also looked into whether or not this amount has changed over time. So are we getting more microplastics accumulating in our organs as time is going on? Before this article came out, there actually was some other research that's found microplastics are getting into our lungs, our intestines, our blood, even our placentas. And all of this is already bad news, but we don't know much about how much is accumulating in our brains. So this research was aiming to answer that. While they were at it, they also wanted to see if people with dementia had higher levels of microplastics in their brains when compared to people without dementia. So these are all really important questions to ask, and I'm really glad that we are getting some research surrounding it. Now, what they did to find all this out was look at post-mortem tissue samples from brain, liver, and kidney samples that have been collected from the time period of 2016 to 2024. To help compare how levels have changed over time, they've also looked into some samples from as far back as 1997. So, when you donate your body to science, this is the cool stuff that you get to contribute to. Now, they did their analysis on these samples so that they could find out how much microplastics were in these tissues, and they did find out some really interesting things. So microplastic concentrations were higher in the brain when compared to other organs like the liver and kidneys. In the 2016 samples, the median plastic concentration in brain tissue was 3,345 micrograms per gram of brain tissue. And in the 2024 samples, so the most recent ones, this number was 4,917 micrograms per gram of brain tissue. And so what this is showing us is that in 8 years, the amount of microplastic concentrations has potentially increased by 47% inside our brains. So as time is going on, more and more microplastics are accumulating in our body tissues, which means that the amount of microplastics we are being exposed to in our environments is increasing. Now, what they found was that polyethylene was the most common plastic found. 75% of the plastic found inside the brain tissue samples was polyethylene. And so if you're wondering where this polyethylene could be coming from, this is one of the most widely produced plastics in the world. It's used in packaging materials, in plastic bags, in plastic food containers, in children's toys. It's also in some fibers of clothes as well. And this was just good timing, but I also recently watched the Netflix documentary called Buy Now, which is pretty much just talking about the overconsumption that's going on right now with online shopping and everything like that. If polyethylene was the most common packaging material, it's not hard to see why this issue is getting worse. If you haven't seen the documentary already, worth a watch. So if you're getting things from Temu and Shein and all these online sites that seem, very affordable, you are probably dealing with a lot of polyethylene. And when they were looking into the brains of people with dementia, the brain samples from dementia patients had far more plastic accumulation than those without dementia. So they had about 26,000 micrograms per gram of brain tissue, and that is a lot higher than the 4,900 than those without dementia that I just mentioned previously. Of course, this study doesn't and it cannot say that microplastics are causing dementia, but what this does is raise the question about whether microplastics are contributing to the cognitive decline that we are seeing at the moment in older individuals. This is definitely worth noting and keeping in mind. Now, if like me, after reading this study and finding out about it, you're wondering how you can minimize microplastic exposure for yourself, look, there's a few things you could do. You could avoid plastic packaged foods and drinks like bottled water, and also you can avoid microwaving food inside plastic containers. If you can, use glass or stainless steel when you're storing food instead. But I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news. I'm really not sure how much all these small things you can do will help when microplastics are in our air, our water, and our food supply. And these are things we can't escape. They're out of our control for the most part, which is a little bit defeating. And it also sucks that this isn't a bigger issue. It does seem like something we should be targeting, and I don't hear too much about it unless it's from random podcasts that I listen to or from research like this that I run into. So I don't have many solutions on this, which is a bit sad, but I'm just going to leave you with that and move on to the next study. What we are starting to see is more research coming out in terms of e-cigarettes and vapes, which is good because a lot of younger people have turned to vapes. They're very common and popular among teenagers. And early this month, we had a study published that looked into the potential link between ADHD symptoms and the use of cigarettes and tobacco use in US youths, so young people in America. The research followed a group of young Americans over a 9-year period from the years 2013 to 2023, and they were aged between 12 and 17 years old. So at the start of this study, they confirmed if any of the children had an ADHD diagnosis from a health professional and whether or not they were taking medication for it. They also had the participants answer some questions about their symptoms just to see how severe the symptoms were. And then throughout the 9 years, the participants reported their use of any nicotine products, including cigarettes and vapes, and also how their symptoms were going. And so what the research discovered was a strong link between how severe ADHD symptoms were and the likelihood that participants ended up starting to use these nicotine products. And so what this tends to show is that having ADHD increases the chances of someone turning to these vapes or smoking. And those participants who didn't have more severe ADHD symptoms, they had the same chance of starting these products as someone without ADHD. So it seems to be the severity of the symptoms itself and not the diagnosis of ADHD that increases the risk of younger people using vapes. And what this research seems to show is that finding and treating ADHD effectively in younger people could potentially reduce the use of these nicotine products like vaping and cigarettes. So I do need to point out that this was observational research. We can't say that having ADHD causes people to use vapes, but a link was found and it suggests that those with more severe symptoms turn to vaping. And if you're wondering why severe ADHD would make someone more likely to use nicotine, it's because nicotine is a stimulant and it can have stimulant effects. And so for people with ADHD, stimulants actually improve focus and attention, which is what ADHD medications do as well. So ADHD medications are stimulants, and so is nicotine. So the use of vaping and smoking is more of a self-medicated behavior, and this isn't great because smoking also comes with its big list of negative health effects. I don't need to go into that. Everyone knows smoking isn't good for your health. The other issue is that nicotine use is also very addictive. You get withdrawal effects from it, which happens the more you use it. If that happens, you can become anxious. ADHD symptoms can actually worsen unless the person uses more and more nicotine. So it's not a good way to treat ADHD, and it's why we need to be picking up, diagnosing, and treating kids with ADHD early and effectively so that they don't turn to these self-medicated methods. So those are the two studies that I found in the past week and wanted to talk about, and I think people should know about. Hopefully you've learned something from them. If there's anything you want me to go into more detail about, please leave a comment. If you've run into some research as well, leave a comment. I love looking into these things. I will see you in the next video, and until then, keep playing the long game.